Hello, everybody. It's Scott Bunce, and today I'm really excited to have Craig Weber, who is a Vistage speaker for over 26 years, has been Vistage Speaker of the Year. He's an author. He's written a couple of great books on communication, conversational capacity, and influence in action. And most recently, he spoke to one of my Vistage groups on communication. And so, Craig, welcome. And I'm so glad you're part of this today.
Hey, thanks for the invitation, Scott. I appreciate being able to spend some time with you.
Yeah. So, when you were with my group, you did this fantastic job about talking about really tough conversations and how to navigate through that, what to look for. You had Venn diagrams, the whole bit, but maybe you could just start us out by talking a little bit about what's the method of these conversations so people can be better communicators and really get through tough conversations.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. So, when people ask me kind of what do you do, I describe at a high level my work as helping people in teams improve their performance by treating dialogue as a discipline. And I
Mm.
think we often take it for granted that people know how to talk to each other in a productive way under pressure when things are difficult, strongly differing points of view about issues that really matter. And it turns out that's a faulty assumption. We don't. And the research is really clear on this. People really struggle with these challenging conversations. So there is a framework, a discipline that I've developed that I refer to as conversational capacity, something we talked about with your CEOs. And we talk about the ability to have constructive, learning focused dialogue about difficult subjects in challenging circumstances and across tough boundaries. And so an individual with high conversational capacity can stay, constructive, learning focused, balanced in high pressure circumstances that would take most people and throw them way off their game. And then a team with high conversational capacity is able to put their most difficult, painful, challenging issues on the table in a meeting, let's say, and do really good work around them. And so, in this sense, sort of a foundational competence that breathes life into any activity that requires people communicate and collaborate for its effectiveness, running meetings, making decisions, navigating change, implementing strategy, giving and receiving feedback. But it's this baseline competence we're often not paying much attention to. So, I'm trying to change that.
Right. Yeah, and you showed us a diagram where if you go off to the left, you're struggling, and maybe you could walk us through those principles on the on that tough discussion.
Yeah, happy to do that. Yeah. So, I talk about a place I refer to in a conversation. It's called the sweet spot. We've got a little image right here. And the sweet spot is that place in a meeting or a conversation where things are open, they're balanced, they're constructive, they're learning focused. Or as we talked about with your group, the sweet spot's that place in a meeting where you don't just have a lot of really smart people around the table. It's the place where you're able to get full access to their smarts. And those are two different things. A lot of people, a lot of business leaders, for example, are focused on that first part of it, get the right people around the table, or as Jim Collins would say, get the right people on the bus. And that's challenging in today's environment. But there's the second piece of it. It doesn't matter if you've done a really good job of getting smart people around the table if you can't access their smarts when you need them. And so the sweet spot's where you get your cake and you eat it too. We got really smart, capable people around the table, and we're getting full access to the smarts. What tends to happen under pressure is that people in teams begin to trigger out of that sweet spot. Some people start shutting down, other people start heating up. And so we can define conversational capacity as the ability of an individual or an entire team to stay ensconced in that sweet spot under pressure when there's a lot of centrifugal force trying to throw us off our game. And I think that begs the question, well, what's going on in the sweet spot? And so we talk about that somewhat tricky balance we need to maintain between two variables. And on the one hand, it's candor. People are being very honest, open, forthright, and direct. But at the same time, it's curiosity. People are open minded, they're inquisitive, they're intellectually humble, and they're eager to learn. That is a good place for a team or a person to operate when they're dealing with a significant issue. They're being very direct and very upfront, so there's no game playing. But at the same time, that candor is balanced with that curiosity. And what tends to happen under pressure is we let go of one pole or the other in a heated conversation. something difficult comes up in a meeting, some people let go of candor, begin to slide out of the sweet spot and they shut down. Other people let go of curiosity, they leave the sweet spot and they start getting argumentative and arrogant. And so we talk about a discipline, a framework for learning to stay in that sweet spot in really challenging circumstances that conspire against it.
I think we've all been in meetings where, just like you said, we've got these smart people around the table, and depending on how they're showing up, they can show up in a certain mood or with preconceptions that take them out of that sweet spot and get off track. What
Yeah.
are your suggestions to get them back into the center and that sweet spot?
Yeah, that's a good question. I get asked that a lot. So I think the very first thing, the very first trick is to learn to stay there yourself. I have very little hope of helping someone else move toward the sweet spot if I can't even stay there. So I hear a lot of people kind of focus, how do I get other people to the sweet spot? So well, let's kind of look in the mirror first and start there. And so I think, how do I build my personal conversational capacity? So, A, even when someone's deliberately trying to provoke me out of the sweet spot, I'm able to stay in that balanced state. That does not happen automatically. That takes some practice. And then I think, how can I engage with others in a way that doesn't force them to the sweet spot? I can't drag them kicking and screaming into the balanced state, but I can engage with them in a way that increases the likelihood. If they've overheated, how might I engage with them in a way that gets them to simmer down and get back to a better place? Or if they've shut down and they've disengaged, how do I, work with them in a way that pulls them towards the sweet spot and maybe gets them to open up and re-engage? That is definitely possible. There's some behavioral frameworks for how to do just that.
Yeah, what I really appreciated in your presentation is you actually had questions that helped get people in the right frame of mind to get them centered again. What are some
Yeah.
key questions that you can throw out to people to get them to get back to being curious and out of the combative zone, if you will?
Well, I think one of the counterintuitive things, if someone's coming in hot, they're really aggressive, they're putting their view out there if it's an absolute fact and taking offense when someone else doesn't agree with it. One counterintuitive way to respond is to actually get curious about where they're coming from. I like a quote from Bob Keegan, the psychologist, who said, behind every frustration is something cared about. So someone's coming in hot. What do they care about? And get curious. And so there's this counterintuitive response. Someone who's coming in hot is pushing their view, sometimes aggressively. It's very disarming when you actually grab and pull it towards you. They're
Mm-hmm.
expecting you to fight or shut down. Those are predictable responses to someone coming in hot. What they don't expect is tell me more. You obviously feel pretty strongly about this. I'd love to get a little more information about why you feel this is such a bad idea. Unpack your thinking for us here. That's not something. So getting curious about what do they care about here? Why are they upset? Why did they call me a troglodyte? That's interesting. Let's find out what's going on. It's a counterintuitive response, but that curiosity can be a very powerful tool when someone's coming in a verbally aggressive way. Someone says, you're an idiot if you think that's going to work. Most people shut down or argue back. But if you said, hey, it wouldn't be the first time I've been an idiot, trust me, where am I getting it wrong today? What are you seeing about this I'm missing?
That is such a good disarming phrase or approach, right? I think you're absolutely right. People are either geared up for battle or they're not engaged, but that curiosity is the missing piece in a lot of conversations.
Right? And I think what takes some of the pressure off, and I get this from some of the CEO groups, is yeah, but what if I don't agree with it? Well, you're not listening or you're not being curious to agree. You're doing it to learn. That's what really matters. I'm trying to learn here. I'm not trying to agree with them. I might agree with them even less after I hear them unpack their thinking, but that's not the goal. The goal is not agreement. It's to learn. And that takes some of the pressure off. Okay, I may not agree with it, but I might learn something about the issue. Let's see if we can't find something useful.
It feels like that's almost a modeling approach for everybody around the table. If they see you do it as a leader, and uh, then they can start to see what you're doing and maybe practice
Yes.
what you're doing to disarm people, to be more inquisitive, to hit that curiosity zone where people start showing up to meetings in a curious mode as opposed to people showing up to the meetings and going, God, not another one of these. And I already know what they're going to say, and this is going to be a problem.
Well said. Yeah, I hear that repeatedly where an executive or a boss will say, yeah, I started using the skills and trying to engage with my team in a more candid and curious way. And I did it without explaining to my team at first. I wanted to be able to model the skills before I tried to share them, or I wasn't going to have a lot of credibility. But before I even had time to explain what I was doing, I saw them picking up on some of the behaviors. And one thing that's an advantage to being the boss, to having that authority, is people watch you like a hawk. And that can be a positive or a negative thing depending on what you're doing with it. And so I think this idea that how can I model behaviors that are more constructive, that are healthier, that serve the team, the decision, the meeting, or the business, and use that as a way to try to, encourage people to behave in a similar way. So yeah, I think that's a great point. How do I use my authority to improve the patterns of dialogue in my team and not inadvertently, do damage to them?
Sure. Uh, any other tricks or tools that you could share with us today on diffusing or making for better conversations?
Well, I think, one of the things we talked about in my workshop there with your CEOs, and it's a key idea in my work, is treat your views like a hypothesis, not a truth.
Hmm.
If you can just do that, most conversations are going to be a lot easier, even around a pretty heated topic, because you're not walking in wedded to a view. You're walking in with a perspective that, hey, I like it. It makes sense. I put some work into this. It served me well in the past, but there could be something about it that's wanting in this situation. I need to bounce it off the team and get some feedback. And so you're using your point of view as a hypothesis to open up the conversation rather than a truth that shuts it down. You're acting more like a scientist trying to test out a hypothesis, not like a religious zealot trying to, push your views on others. And so I like this idea of holding your view hypothetically, even under pressure. And that one simple thing can make a huge difference. And we have a range of practices and skills for getting better at doing that. But the brain tends to hand us a view of reality that looks and feels pretty solid, and it's incredibly deceptive because most of the time it's anything but solid. So learning to kind of recognize just how easily your brain misinterprets what's going on around it. So you're holding your views in a more skeptical, more humble, more curious way. That's a great way to take the edge off most conversations.
Yeah, when you come across and say, look, this is a hypothetical approach and I want your feedback, it's just got to open people up so easily to now go, well, wait a minute, he's open to having another point of view. And somebody who might have been a wallflower sitting in the back of the room now wants to engage because they get the feeling that somebody cares, listens, and wants to hear my feedback.
Well said. It's a great way, I think, to increase, what Amy Edmondson at Harvard refers to as psychological safety. If I see my bosses putting their view out there like a hypothesis, it's a little easier to open up and engage. And if I suspect my boss is putting your view forward in a way that's just an absolute truth, and if I don't agree with it, it's going to be an argument and I'll lose. So what's the point? And so how do I create a more psychologically safe environment? Well, build your conversational capacity, treat your view like a hypothesis, and don't just sit back passively hoping people on your team join you in the conversation. Invite them in. You need to take a more active interest in how people are seeing things. So if you've got a strong finance background in a meeting, you might say to people, hey, look, you know me, I've got a finance background. I tend to have a very strong finance focused lens when I'm looking at a decision like this. I want to hear from operations, HR, and a couple of other functions who might have a different way of look at the problem. So I'm not just sitting back passively hoping my marketing person or my engineering team chimes in. I'm actively encouraging them to help me expand and improve my thinking, to look at the issue in a more complete way, recognizing I've got a filter that comes with some blind spots, and I'm asking people to help me fill them in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like asking for help. And
Well
that's
said. That,
so
in
powerful.
fact, it's actually exactly what you're doing. You're asking for help. Help me improve my thinking. I'll put my view on the table and explain it, and I want you to beat it up. Let's go. If I walk out of here with the same view I walked in with, I'll be really disappointed in the meeting. And I love a quote from David Coate, the former CEO of Honeywell, and this was in the materials I left with you and your execs. But he said, "My job is to be right at the end of the meeting, not at the beginning of it." I think that's a great way to think when you go into a conversation where something important is going to be addressed. My goal is to be right or smarter or more informed at the end of the meeting, not to walk in with a pre-baked view of the issue and to sell it to everyone around the table.
Greg, I just love these insights. So good. So let's talk about you for a second. You've written a couple of books. Tell us a little snapshot of your books.
Yeah, the first book, Conversational Capacity, McGraw-Hill. It's kind of, it outlines the basic discipline, and then there's also influence and action. A lot of people started asking, I love this. How do I get better at it? How do I build it? And so influence and action was the answer. And it's a workbook and a deeper dive for the individual. How do I build my capacity? And I'm currently working on book number 3, which is going to be how do we build our collective conversational capacity, a team, a project, or an entire organization? How do we create a conversational, a pattern of conversation, you could say, or dialogue that lines up nicely with and supports our strategy? And so those are kind of the 2 books I published, book I'm working on now.
Great. Well, again, because you're a renowned speaker and author, people are going to want to know how to get a hold and interact with you. How do they do that?
Great question. Conversationalcapacity.com is a great way to kind of learn more about the content. I'm always on LinkedIn, so that's an easy way to reach out to me and connect with me. So those that do a website or LinkedIn are typically the way most people reach out.
Great. Well, Craig, thank you again for sharing your insights with my group in Vistage, as well as today for anybody that's watching. I think that it's easy, it's understandable, it breaks down barriers, and I think you've come up with wonderful tools.
Well, thank you again. Thanks very much for letting me have a chat with you and share some of those ideas.
Very good. All right, we're going to wish you all the best and thank you again.
My pleasure. Thank you. Have a good day, Scott.